And knowledge of God is a huge gift. And nowadays, it's so accessible. You can all have as much knowledge as you want. And that's a great, wonderful thing. But as we're studying, the more we know, the more we have to demand from ourselves to live up to that gift, to make sure that what we're giving God, what we're doing, is not just commensurate, is even more than what we know of Him. So we are continuing looking back at ideas from Ethics of the Fathers. We're going to look at chapter 3. Chapter 3 was actually what was read yesterday. And we have already looked at chapter 3. Of course, I'm going to do statements that we didn't look at before. So in the first statement of chapter 3, it says, reflect upon 3 things and you will not come to sin. Know from where you come and to where you are going, and before whom you're destined to give an accounting. From where you come, from a putrid drop. From where you are going, to a place of dust, maggots, worms, meaning the earth, the decay of the body, and before whom you are destined to give an accounting, before the Supreme King of Kings, the Holy One, blessed be He. Here we're being instructed, and again, this is, so to speak, almost like going beyond the letter of the law, which is all of Ethics of the Fathers. Ethics of the Fathers is not telling us the law, telling us beyond the law. So beyond this is a whole list of things you got to do, and there's a whole list of things you can't do, and on the level of what you say, and on the level of what you think, and on the level of what you feel, and on the level of what you act, and everything God wants to do a certain way and to not do a certain way. But there's also this like overarching sense of His presence. And when we think of His presence, it could be this very uplifting, huge wow of the enormity of God. But here we're also connecting that to the smallness of man, the overwhelming grandeur of God, but the smallness of man. What did we come from? What are going to happen to us in the end? Happening to us, meaning happening to our bodies. So we're so small, started off so small, ending up so small. But we have the idea of there's going to be this reckoning, because we're really not so small. We are so small, but our lives are also so meaningful to God. And what we do is so meaningful. And every time we choose to serve Him, it's so meaningful. And every time we overcome temptation and we do the right, then we do the difficult. So here we are taking ourselves, from this putrid drop. That's the beginning of the line. And the end of the line are those maggots and worms. But in between, we have the ability to create something infinite if we choose. And of course, many people at the moment are not going the road of Noahide. There's about 8 billion mankind. How many Noahides are there? So there's not that many that are making that choice consciously. But everyone starts off as that little drop. Everyone their body ends in the maggots and worms. But there's the ability to create something eternal in between A and Z. In between the beginning point and the end point, there's the ability to create something eternal. And we have that in our hands. And every time you make a choice, and you make a right choice, and you make a God choice to do or to not do, because this is what God wants. This is changing and giving the quality of forever, that life between that starting point to that ending point. Remember, there's going to be a reckoning. God's looking, and God so appreciates every time we make that right choice. Now, different people have different things that inspire them to do the right and not the wrong. And obviously, we all have temptations. Sometimes we didn't get enough sleep. We're not eating right for sure. We're irritable. We're short-tempered. The weather, the this, the that. There's only things we could blame it on. So this is one point of inspiration to keep you focused, to keep you making those right choices, making those eternal choices. Would anyone like to share things that they use that keep them focused to make the right choices and do things that are meaningful, even though short term they might be more annoying or more difficult than other options?
I do it a lot, though. I do it at work. I do it. I'm aware of choices, and my thinking is deeper. That kind of guides me.
You're aware of the choice. You're aware of making the choice, which is generally the right choice is usually the more difficult choice, the harder choice. If it was easier, it wouldn't be such a choice. But you're not sure what motivates you. You're just saying, I think more deeply, so therefore I'm naturally going to do what God wants.
Well, I am motivated by, Hashem, and knowing something's more godly than maybe the other thing. So I'm aware of all of that. I'm just seeing it more. And it's almost like a conversation that's happening within me.
You're within yourself. And as you're saying, this is the right choice, this is the God choice, this is a more significant choice. Okay, you're good, you're going. Someone else, Natanya, Danielle, how do you inspire yourself to stay focused and make the right, more difficult choice?
Well, I think these days what motivates me to focus is that my fear of sham. Like for instance, I'm gonna use my phone while I'm at work. I cannot do that. I was like, not because no one is watching me, but I mean, I fear God that I have to be honest. Someone is paying me. I have to do my job. So it's not about me and my boss or my manager looking at me, but it's about me and my connection to God. That I have to keep do
That's
good.
beautiful. And that's such a
the best.
practical example. I mean, they always have these articles about how much money is being lost. I mean, if you look across industry in America, and I'm sure it's true in Canada, by people on their phone, or, if you go back 20 years, playing games on their computer, instead of working. So of course, so many people are challenged with that. And there is a work ethic some people have, and some people have a boss that micromanages, or they have so much that's expected from them. It's not realistic to have time to space out. But for the rest of the world, it's a very big challenge. They usually fail. And Natanya is saying, it's a very realistic challenge, but she has fear of God. So she's very clearly identifying her inspiration is fear of God. And that actually, we're told, is the most foundational emotion one has for God. Meaning, of course, we don't just want to have fear, we also want to have love. But that already takes more work. And of course, I'm sure Tanya has it as well. But the first starting, which is therefore the most strong foundational feeling we have for God, is fear. Fear of punishment, fear of losing the relationship, fear of getting in trouble, fear of doing the wrong thing. So when we can tap into that, it can really help us, like it's helping Natanya in the nitty-gritty of life that we all contend with. Mm-hmm. Check your emails, check your Facebook, check your texts, or no, you're working, someone's paying you. Well, what difference does it make? Because there's a God who's watching. Very, very practical, very real. Danielle, what about you?
I agree with Natanya, of course. And I'll also say I have 3 little people that I'm hoping to raise in a godly way, and they're almost always with me. So it's easy to make sure I'm making the right decisions. Mm-hmm. Of course, with that very present reminder, how important it is to make the right choices and decisions.
Because you're saying that you're their role model, and if you slap
exactly
off, who knows what's going to happen to them?
Well, yeah, and if we're trying to teach them to act a certain way or do a certain thing, and then we do the opposite, they're not going to trust us.
Do the right thing. That's still a hope, but without it, you're totally lost. Yes, exactly. What Danielle's saying, every parent should definitely internalize, and of course, as we were talking about before, as a homeschooling mom, they're always with her. They're always seeing. But the truth is, even for parents whose children go to school, when you're home, they're aware far more than we realize. They're listening to us much more when we're not talking to them than when we are talking to them. They are picking it all up, hopefully for good. So there's the inspiration, like Robin's saying, of just being a deep thinker and being conscious of God. There's the inspiration of fear of God, and there's the inspiration of being a role model, which again, Danielle's saying the closest thing we have to us, which is our children, but really all of us are role models. Every single one of us is a role model, and therefore, if you are at work and your kids aren't there, or you don't have children, or children that are around, you're still a role model, because all of us, like it or not, to your peers, to your contemporaries, to your colleagues, you represent God. I mean, they all know you're different by now. They all know you have this belief system. So when you make choices, that's representing God, like it or not, including your bad choices. I think of this sometimes when I drive. Well, I'm not going to drive properly. This is going to be a desecration of God's name, because here I am, a person who's religious, a person who's officially leading a godly life. And if I'm driving in a rude fashion, well, that's a reflection on God. It's a reflection on how a person who cares about God behaves. So what Danielle's saying, which of course is very true for her, she doesn't have to work as hard to feel it because she's so conscious of it. Both they're her children, not other people in the world, and they're with her all the time. But for all of us, that is a motivation. We're never off the hook because someone out there recognizes you're a person who serves God. More people realize you're a person who serves God than you realize. I don't know if any of you ever had it the other way, where someone said, oh, I'm surprised such a godly person behaves like that. Or conversely, if someone ever came up to you who you didn't even realize knew and said, oh, I know you're a godly person, so whatever. They have a question, they have a comment, they want to ask you something, they want to comment on something you did that they appreciated. I would find it hard to believe that you haven't had those experiences. Have you had something like that in your life that you can remember? Where people are looking at you,
Yes, thank
for
God.
good or for bad, because you're a godly person.
Yeah.
Danielle's saying, absolutely. And I'm positive Natanya and Robin also have had those experiences. If it's coming to mind now or not,
Yes.
that's what happens. Robin saying yes. That's what happens. Not that we are wearing a badge, and not that we know even how people know, but they know.
You know, it's how you listen to someone and how you respond.
So people realize, and therefore we always represent something, and that always can motivate us. It's actually very interesting. A very great sage on his deathbed, he blessed his students that they should fear God like you fear a person. And they're like, what? Like, that's the big blessing of this great, great sage on his deathbed. And he said, yeah, because when people are watching, you don't sin. So this sort of combines what Natanya said about fear of God, keeping from sin, and what Danielle's saying about being this example. So here's this great sage saying to his students, who are obviously very great people, be aware. And there is a certain way you behave when people are watching. And of course, God's always watching. And of course, as we're saying, people are also always watching. So that was the first statement. Let's jump to the end of this chapter, to the 16th. 16th statement is a parable. Everything is given on collateral, and a net is spread over all the living. The shop is open. The shopkeeper extends credit. The ledger is opened. The hand writes, and whoever wishes to borrow, let him come and borrow. The collectors make their rounds regularly, every day. An exact payment from man with or without his knowledge of his debts. And they have on what to rely. The judgment is a judgment of truth, and everything is prepared for the feast. So this is a very powerful metaphor, a very strong metaphor. So here we'll focus on the metaphor, and then tell me what you think it's representing and how this impacts us. So here we have, of course, there's a few layers to this metaphor, but here we have whoever it is, the shopkeeper, whatever goods he has that you need, and he's so generous. He's like, yeah, you can take on collateral. You could take now and pay me back later. You want bread, you want milk, you want cereal, or maybe he sells things that you're going to sell to others. Oh, you want to buy this in lot? You want to get a whole bunch of buttons that you're going to resell to other people? Or you want to get many spools of thread or much grain? No problem. I'm very generous. I'm just writing it all down. And we can take, and we can take, and we can take. And every day there's a collection. Every day the collectors come around, and everyone has to pay back everything they borrowed. What do you think is the meaning of this? What do you think is, now of course they're sort of open to a few interpretations, but how do you understand this metaphor? What do you think is being implied here? He's very generous. He's letting you borrow. You got lots of debts, and it's all going to get paid back. Thoughts?
Is it something to do with like all of your mitzvahs and good deeds? I don't know.
No, we're talking about borrowing. We're talking about getting on credit. We're getting things on credit. We're getting on credit, and then we're gonna have to, of course, pay back for everything we took on credit. So what do you think we get on credit? Getting on credit means right now you don't have to pay, but later you're gonna have to pay for it.
So would it be like something like good deeds, your way? Just thinking like good deed. Like you can have anything you want, but you have to pay it back. You can have as much as you want.
You can have
So-
anything you want, as much as you want, and you have
What
to
would
pay
it
back.
be like?
So what do we have on credit? What do we
Yeah.
get?
So what is it?
What is it? What is it that we're getting on credit? That we're getting without
Time?
putting money down, but then we got to pay it all back.
I don't know.
Everything in our life, everything God's giving us on credit. Meaning we start off penniless. We haven't done anything yet to earn anything, right? We start off completely naked, completely devoid of any merit. And then we're thrown into life. And God gives us many, many, many things. He gives us life. He gives us health. He gives us parents that take care of us. He gives us gifts and talents and abilities. He gives us blessing after blessing after blessing. And we're just taking, we're borrowing more. Yeah, write my name down. Yeah, I'm taking another quart of milk. Yeah, I'm taking another quart of milk. Yeah, I'm taking some more cheese, some more eggs. Or yeah, I'm taking cases of goods because I'm going to sell it and make a profit. I'm taking more cases and more cases. No problem. The shopkeeper is very generous. Take whatever. Yeah, take. Because he knows that in the end, everything has to be paid back for. Everything God's giving us, we're supposed to use to serve him. We're supposed to pay for everything. We're supposed to utilize it. It's almost like, I mean, there's a metaphor, which is, I guess you could say, piggyback on this metaphor. But if you can envision, this is people at a fair, the big fair once a year in Leipzig, somewhere in Europe. And all the little merchants would come to the fair and take lots and lots of goods that they would then spend a year selling. Now, when they're taking the goods, they don't have the money to pay for it. So they're taking it on credit. But then they're going to spend the year selling it, and then they're going to come back and pay back and take more. And that's how it worked in those days. So there was one such merchant who was this big merchant. And as he leaves the fair, he has caravans full of goods. And he sees some little schmendrick on the road, some little peddler with maybe like a knapsack of goods. And he's like, sort of speak like, get off the road. Like, hello, you're taking up the road. Look at me. I'm so big. I'm so huge. I have caravans and caravans of goods. And the guy looks at him and says, excuse me, who's poor now, me or you? I just owe for the stuff on my back. All these caravans and caravans represent what you owe, what debt you're in. Again, implying that also is a metaphor, a parable, implying that when we look at our life and we see so many blessings in our life, and we should always see so many blessings in our life, we want to use all. We want to give them all back to God. We want to validate all of them. We want to make sure that all the blessings God gives to us, we always are trying to return with interest. We're always trying to pay back with how we utilized it to serve God. Any talent, any gift, any possibility in life, it's all a stream of free credit, but we can utilize, make a profit from it. Like the merchant, he buys something on credit, but then he sells it for more money. So there's a profit. So we have all these blessings and opportunities and abilities, and then we have to use it. And then as we use it for God, we're paying it back with even more. We're validating all the trust, all the credit, all the free blessings we got. How does this thought impact you?
Well, I think it's very deep, and it's a good way to like looking at things and thinking about yourself and your interactions and how you're giving and what you're doing. It's very good thought.
Yeah, it's the goal, of course, is to get us to think. Robin said it's a good thought because the goal is to get us to think. The goal is to get us to think about our lives and think about all the things we've taken on credit, all the things we've been given. And sometimes as we find ourselves so blessed, and I hope we all find ourselves so blessed, to realize every blessing is is calling to us to be utilized for God. It says that everything God created in this world, he created for a purpose. And if we have something and we don't use it to serve God, it's like we're forcing him to create something for nothing. If God made you a great organizer and you don't use that for him, you don't use that in any way besides for your own selfish needs, you're forcing God to create something for nothing. He created something, he gave it to you. It's a beautiful gift. How are you using it for him? Well, how am I supposed to use it for him? No, you're supposed to use everything for him. You're supposed to look at everything in your life and think, how is this part of serving God? How can I use this to lead a more godly life, to lead a better life, to bring God more out to the world? To the next statement, which is the 17th, a little bit long, but we'll focus on some ideas. If there is no Torah, there is no proper social conduct. If there's no proper social conduct, there's no Torah. If there's no wisdom, there's no fear of God. If there's no fear of God, there's no wisdom. If there's no knowledge, there's no understanding. If there's no understanding, there's no knowledge. If there's no sustenance, there's no Torah. If there's no Torah, there's no sustenance. He used to say, anyone whose wisdom exceeds his good deeds, you have more knowledge than actual practice of serving God. To what can he be compared? To a tree whose branches are numerous. There's a lot of Torah. But whose roots are few, because there's not so many practical deeds of service. What's the problem with that? Well, the wind comes and uproots it and turns it upside down. And then we bring a verse to prove it. But anyone whose good deeds exceeds his wisdom, to what can he be compared? To a tree whose branches are few, his Torah is not as much, but whose roots are numerous. The roots are the good deeds. Those are strong. So that even if all the winds in the world were to come and blow against it, it could not be moved from its place. And then there's a very long quote to prove that point. So that end, obviously the beginning was interesting, but I really want to focus on the end, which is really focusing on this idea of how much we know versus how much we do. And again, speaking metaphorically, because often a metaphor helps us understand something very vividly, comparing it to a tree. And how much we do are the roots, and how much we know are the branches. And of course, when you're looking at a tree, what you can see and appreciate are the beautiful branches that provide shade or fruits or flowers, or extending what we see as, the vastness of the tree are the branches. That's what we know about God. But the roots are what we're doing for God. And the stronger the roots, the stronger the tree. But if what we're doing is far less than what we know, the tree is top heavy and can topple over. It's a thought that really expresses this idea of we always have to make sure, because knowledge is a gift and knowledge of God is a huge gift. And nowadays it's so accessible. This is a class. There are many classes offered. There's much learning you could do on your own, much study online. There's so much out there in English. You can all have as much knowledge as you want. And that's a great, wonderful thing. But as we're studying, the more we know, the more we have to demand from ourselves to live up to that gift, to make sure that what we're giving God, what we're doing is not just commensurate, is even more than what we know of him. So it's almost like as you know more and more, you should demand from yourself and say, what was I doing until now? And how can I improve? How could I give God more? God's giving me more. He's constantly showering me with the most precious thing there is, knowledge of him. How do I give him more? But sometimes it's hard to think of what you could do more because everything you should do, you're doing and you're maxed out. Then it's good to talk it over with someone that could help you, that could give you advice on here's how you could give God more. And for some of you, it's like, no, that's no issue. You know plenty of ways you could give God more. But sometimes you are like, I don't even know what you can do more. There's always more. There's always more. God is infinite. Our service of him is infinite. And even if we're doing an amazing job, we can always, always, always. Has anyone seen in themselves this journey of as they know more, they do more, and as they do more, they learn more, and as they learn more, they do more, meaning that these two roads, they see how they run parallel in their life? It should. That's the ideal. The ideal is these two roads should run parallel because it's very natural. The more you learn, the more you should be inspired to do and have knowledge of doing and have an awareness of the significance of doing. And as you do more, it deepens your relationship, which opens you up to learn more, which inspires you to do more, which opens you up to learn more. And that's really how it should go. There should be this natural back and forth that each one of these roads naturally feeds the other. But if you see for yourself it's not happening so naturally, you have to check and look and make sure that the two roads stay parallel. So those were a few ideas from Ethics of the Fathers. I wanted to also take the opportunity, so we have a few minutes left, to speak about the 15th of Av. 15th of Av is coming up this week because today is the 12th. So the 15th is Wednesday. And I wanted to speak a bit about the 15th of Av and what it symbolizes and how we can relate to that in our life. So to give the backstory, there's two backstories. One is about the 15th of the month and one is about Av. So we'll start with the 15th of the month. The 15th of every month in the Jewish calendar is always considered a very, very significant day because that's the time of the fullness of the moon. And the waxing and waning of the moon represents the Jewish people. So when the moon is at its fullness, that really represents a certain spiritual energy that the Jews have then, which is why Passover is on the 15th of the month and Sukkot is on the 15th of the month. The 15th again represents the fullness and the power of the moon, which represents the Jewish people. And that's true for every month. But the 15th of this month is special. And it's special because we just finished like the saddest day in the Jewish calendar. This past Thursday was the 9th of Av. And the 9th of Av is the national day of tragedy for the Jews, both in terms of what happened on that day and what it represents. That was the first time we see the 9th of Av in our history. It was actually in the desert when the spies came back and gave their bad report about the land. And it says the Jews cried that night, the whole night. And God said, well, you're crying for nothing, but okay, I'll give you something to cry about. This will be the night that we'll have something to cry about. This will be the day designated for your tears. And actually, every year after that, as long as the Jews were in the desert, people that the women didn't sin. Of course, the women are always the true believers. But the men, and not the tribe of Levi, not the Levites, they didn't sin either. They were also the true believers. But all men not from the tribe of Levi. Every year on the 9th of Av, once they reached the age of 60, they had to dig out their graves and lay there at night and wait if this was going to be the night they were going to die. Because there was a decree that those men would not enter the land of Israel. So every year on the 9th of Av, it was a very sad time when people died in their graves that they dug that night. And hundreds of years later, the first temple was destroyed on the 9th of Av. And about a little less than 500 years after the destruction of the first temple, the second temple was also destroyed on the 9th of Av. Many hundreds of years later, World War I broke out on the 9th of Av. And of course, World War I directly led to World War II and the Holocaust. Natural consequence of what happened after World War I. So we see in the calendar it being such a sad, tragic day, and all tragedies we associate with the 9th of Av, which is why, actually, that by the redemption, the 9th of Av will be the biggest holiday in the whole year. Prophet says that the 4 fast days, there are 4 fast days commemorating the destruction of the temple. And the prophet says that those 4 fast days will all be holidays by redemption. Not just we won't be fasting. Well, obviously we won't be fasting. The temple's rebuilt and everything's great and amazing. Why fast? Not like it's a holiday because we're so glad we're not fasting. But it's a holiday because when we look back at the destruction, we recognize it was part of construction. Meaning God has to keep the rule book. And according to God's rules, you're not even allowed to take away 1 stone from the altar. And God burnt the whole temple down twice. How could he do that? That's like against all of his rules. Well, the only way you're allowed to raise the temple is to build something even more magnificent, to build the eternal temple of redemption. So every one of those 4 fast days, and most especially the 9th of Av, isn't about destruction. The core was always construction. The core was always creating the groundwork for redemption. But now we don't see it. We see it as sad and as tragic and as horrible and as a lot of afflictions and a lot of suffering. And it's It's the harshest fast day of the year, meaning it has the exact same rules as Yom Kippur. But Yom Kippur, we're higher than food. We're so angelic. On the 9th of Av, we're lower than it all. It's so tragic. So it's really a time where you feel the pain and the loss and the sorrow, which you don't feel at all on Yom Kippur. So it's really the toughest day of the year. And all this will get transformed. And by the redemption, this will literally be the happiest day of the year. Literally, it will be the day people will be waiting for and anticipating and so excited about, because all that energy that reflected so harsh will all be turned around to reveal what it's really about, which is such joy and such redemption. So that's the backstory to explain the 15th of Av. Because in a similar vein, again, the 15th of every month is the fullness of the moon, the fullness of the power of that month. So if the 9th of Av is the saddest time, when we come to the fullness of that power, it's the most special time. And that's where our sages actually say that the greatest days for the Jewish people were the 15th of Av and Yom Kippur. Literally, Yom Kippur, which of course we all know is the holiest day of the calendar, is compared to the 15th of Av. And the way the sages say it, the 15th of Av and Yom Kippur, they're putting the 15th of Av first, which means they're saying it's even more special, which is really strange. Unless you understand all this and you say, no, the 15th of Av was even more special because you take the transformative energies of the tragedies, that's even more powerful than Yom Kippur. So how does this apply practically? Practically, there were many good things that happens to the Jews on Yom Kippur, on the 15th of Av, like I spoke about when the first 15th of Av we see goes back to the first 9th of Av we see, because I told you how in the desert, in the second year, when the 9th of Av first became the national day of tragedy, and every year they would dig out the graves, the men of 60 and older, and lie down there and see if they were going to die that night. Well, when the Jews were in the last year, okay, for 38 years, this degree has been hanging over their heads, and now it's the last year in the desert. And the men that reached age 60 dug their graves and lie down in them. And the next morning, they were all alive. They were like, that's weird. Maybe we miscalculated the date. Let's try again the next night. And the next night, they dug their graves, said goodbye to their family, their wives, their children. They lie down in their graves. And the next morning, they were all alive. And they did it the next night. And they did it the next night. And they couldn't figure out what was happening. Because they knew every year this is what happens. Now at this point, the oldest men are 60 years old. Anyone older than that already has passed away in the previous year. And it came the 15th of Av. And of course, on the 15th of Av, they saw the full moon. And they're like, well, definitely we've passed the 9th of Av because we see a full moon. And that means the decree is over. We all have been gifted with a gift called life. We're all entering the Holy Land. We're all entering Israel. Anyone that was supposed to die because of the sin of the tribes, of the spies, already passed away previous years. This year, we all have life. This year, we're all entering Israel. That was the first time the 15th of Av was celebrated. And it was celebrated many times afterwards. There were many great things that happened to the Jewish people on the 15th of Av. I won't enumerate them now, but just bring out one point practically to mark the greatness of this day of the 15th of Av and Yom Kippur, the two greatest days, as our sages say. There was a very interesting custom, which is the girls of Jerusalem, some say all the Jewish girls and some say just the girls of Jerusalem had this custom, that they would go out dancing in the fields. On the 15th of Av, they were dancing, and on Yom Kippur, I guess when they weren't watching the ceremony going on in the temple, they would dance in the fields. And it was a time of matrimony. And men would come and they would make matches, and many people will get engaged and married through what happened on the 15th of Av and on Yom Kippur. And there was a very interesting special custom that I want to highlight that happened during this dancing. Here you have the dancing. And of course, this is the dancing that people are going to notice you in a positive, godly way. I mean, obviously, if they're doing it on Yom Kippur, there's only godliness going on here, and also on the 15th of Av. This was godly and pure. And obviously, people are on a high enough level that it was godly and pure. It might not be that way. But what did the girls do? It says every girl took her dress took the dress she would go dancing with and gave it to another girl. Gave it to a girl that had less than her. Every single girl. So no girl wore her best dress. Everyone passed that best dress on to someone else. And that's how they went dancing. And I thought that was a really beautiful idea that we could think about for a minute in terms of accessing this energy, because of course the energy is going to be out there, especially on this Wednesday, Tuesday night Wednesday, the 15th of Av. Imagining how, like imagine if you were, I don't know, going for a job interview and you know a piece of information that would be really impress the people you were interviewing with, and you see someone else in line for the interview and you share with them that piece of information. Well, that's suicidal, right? You know, you found that information, you worked hard, you were going to use it to impress, you know, the people from HR or whatever that are interviewing you, and you share it with someone else that they have that advantage. Who does that? But that's in essence what these women were doing. And it's just a really beautiful insight into how do we celebrate and mark a time of such specialness like the 15th of Av by being so loving and generous and selfless, because those are traits that God loves. So if it's such a holy day and it's such an opportunity to get close to God, you'd say, well, run to your prayer book, run to a synagogue, run to pray or fast or maybe give charity. Those are all good things. Run to study Torah. That's a wonderful thing. But it's also a wonderful thing. Run to be selfless. Run to give someone else an advantage that you have. Run to put someone else first. When you're looking for something, when you're needy, when you, obviously every girl dancing needed her mate, because if she had her mate, she wouldn't be dancing. So when you're as needy as the next person, put someone else first. And that's really showing the true nobility of spirit. I'm not recommending reading Holocaust books, because Holocaust books can be very depressing, talking about depressing, sad things. But there was a book that I read recently. It's called, I believe, Conquering the Dragon. And it was truly inspirational, because this woman who went through, you know, death camps and several camps, and it was, you know, obviously suffered tremendously. But what she constantly is focusing on is the nobility of spirit of the people there, of her and all those people that were suffering with her, and how so many of them had such love for each other. And what could they do to help someone else? But whatever they could do, whatever they had, and they had like nothing but to give to help another person. And she's giving concrete detail after concrete detail of literal self-sacrifice of people whose own lives were on the line every single second, but of such nobility of spirit that they constantly rejoiced. What gave them true joy was to be there for someone else. And obviously none of us ever want to be in such horrific situations, and none of us ever will be in such horrific situations, because redemption is coming. So the bad stuff we're done with. But just really celebrating that nobility of spirit, that ability to put someone else in front of yourself, that ability when you have a need to prioritize someone else's needs, is just a really special, loud message of this day. And it's such a special day, and that's the way to grab its energy. So especially for this Tuesday night, Wednesday, maybe we could all try to think of some way we could emulate that, emulate those dancing girls, and think of how we can put someone else in front of ourselves and give someone else something that we also need, but we're choosing to give it to them instead of us. And that's really the energy of the 15th of Av.